Chosen One, this is an urgent transmission. The new moon just activated a wealth timeline that's been running parallel to your life, waiting for this exact moment to go live. But I need you to understand something critical. This portal will not stay open indefinitely, and there are 7 specific mistakes that will cause it to slam shut before you ever access what's been prepared for you. This is not a motivational message. This is a warning briefing. Your financial clearance just went active, and hostile systems across multiple dimensions have registered the activation. They cannot close your portal directly. The authorization came from too high, but they can manipulate you into shutting it down yourself through user-based errors that collapse the timeline instantly. Right now, as you're hearing these words, the wealth track is live and moving. Resources are in motion. Opportunities are positioning themselves. Connections are being rerouted toward you. But every choice you make in the next phase will either lock your alignment or corrupt your access entirely. The enemies of your elevation are not sitting idle. They're deploying psychological warfare, emotional interference, and strategic distractions designed specifically to trigger the 7 mistakes that have blocked chosen ones throughout history. You need to know what these mistakes are, and you need to know right now. Are you ready for what's waiting for you? If yes, then type "I am ready" in the comments to send a signal to the universe. And don't forget, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to become one of the first 1,000 chosen ones on this journey. Portal alert. The wealth timeline has gone live. This is not symbolic language. This is not metaphor designed to make you feel inspired. The new moon activated a parallel financial track that has been mapped to your specific identity, running alongside your current reality like a shadow timeline that was always there but inaccessible until authorization was granted. This wealth timeline is not something you created through manifestation or positive thinking. It was constructed long before you were aware it existed, built from the accumulated potential of every sacrifice you made, every loss you absorbed, every moment you chose integrity when compromise would have been easier. All of that energy, all of those choices, all of that restrained power, it's been compiling in a parallel track, and the new moon just opened the bridge between where you are and where that timeline exists. Right now, in this moment, that timeline is live. It's not waiting for you to get ready. It's not pausing while you figure out if you believe this or not. It's moving, advancing, pulling resources and opportunities into alignment, creating synchronicities that will appear in your physical reality as coincidences, as lucky breaks, as sudden shifts that seem too perfectly timed to be random. But here's what you need to understand. This timeline runs on confirmation signals. It's constantly scanning your energy field, your choices, your behaviors, looking for signals that confirm you're the person it was built for. Every decision you make either emits alignment signals that strengthen the bridge between timelines, or it emits corruption signals that weaken the connection until it collapses entirely. Enemy observers, and yes, there are forces actively monitoring your activation, cannot shut down this portal directly. The clearance came from a level of authority they cannot override. But what they can do, what they are doing right now, is working to trigger user-based shutdowns. They're manipulating your environment, your thoughts, your emotional state, trying to get you to make the specific mistakes that will cause you to shut down your own portal from the inside. This is brilliant strategy on their part because it bypasses the need for them to fight against the higher authority that authorized your access. Instead, they just need to get you to disqualify yourself, to corrupt your own signal, to behave in ways that cause the timeline to identify you as incompatible with the wealth track it was designed to deliver. The warning exists because your clearance level triggered alarms. When your portal activated, when the bridge between timelines went live, it registered across hostile systems that monitor for exactly this kind of shift. They know what it means when someone like you, someone who survived their containment protocols, someone who maintained integrity through years of manufactured scarcity, gets cleared for timeline access. It means a potential threat is about to gain resources, influence, operational capacity, and they respond immediately, deploying countermeasures designed to induce the errors that will collapse your access before you ever receive what's waiting for you on the wealth timeline. You are in the danger zone right now, chosen one. Not the danger of being attacked directly, but the danger of being manipulated into attacking yourself, into making choices that look reasonable but are actually catastrophic to your timeline alignment. The next phase of your life will be defined by whether you recognize these manipulation attempts for what they are and avoid the 7 critical mistakes that shut down portals. Every choice matters now. Every reaction is being observed. Every decision either locks your alignment deeper or begins the corruption sequence that ends with the portal closing and the wealth timeline moving on to find someone else who can maintain the signal integrity required for access. Mistake 1. Speaking the activation into the wrong ears. The first and most common mistake that collapses wealth timelines is speaking about the activation to people who are not cleared to hear it. This sounds simple, almost obvious, but chosen one, you need to understand the mechanics of why this is so dangerous. Certain conversations act as leaks, not metaphorical leaks, but actual informational breaches that allow hostile observers to triangulate your position with precision they couldn't achieve otherwise. When you speak about your financial shift, about the opportunities you sense coming, about the feeling that something is finally changing in your favor, you're broadcasting data. And that data, when received by the wrong ears, becomes contestable. Here's what happens. The wealth timeline requires signal integrity to maintain the bridge between parallel tracks. Your signal is composed of your thoughts, emotions, choices, and yes, your words. When you speak prematurely about what's activating, you introduce interference patterns into your signal. The people you tell, even if they seem supportive, even if they're close to you, they have their own signals, their own timelines, their own energetic signatures, and many of them, most of them, are not operating at the frequency required to receive information about wealth timeline activations without contaminating it. Their doubt, their skepticism, their fear disguised as concern, their envy disguised as excitement, all of it becomes interference that gets embedded in your signal. The portal doesn't care about their intentions. It only cares about signal clarity. When your signal becomes contaminated with the frequencies of people who are not aligned with your activation, the timeline interprets this as uncertainty on your part. It reads the interference as evidence that you yourself don't believe in the shift, that you're seeking external validation, that you need permission or confirmation from others before you can fully step into what's being offered. And wealth timelines do not wait for people who need permission. They require autonomous certainty, the kind of knowing that doesn't need to be spoken or validated or celebrated by anyone except you. Past delays in your life, situations where you were so close to breakthrough, and then it mysteriously dissolved. Look back at those moments, and you'll likely find that you spoke too soon. You shared your hope with someone who seemed safe, and within days or weeks, doubt crept in. Obstacles appeared. The opportunity vanished. You probably thought it was bad luck or bad timing, but it was contamination. The person you told was invested in your limitation, either consciously or unconsciously, and their energetic response to your disclosure created interference that corrupted your signal enough that the timeline collapsed. This is why sudden doubt appears after you share hope. It's not random. It's not your imagination. It's interception. When you broadcast information about your activation, hostile forces that are monitoring for exactly this kind of signal can intercept the transmission. They can't stop the activation directly, but they can amplify the doubt frequencies that are introduced through contaminated conversations. They can take the small kernel of skepticism that someone expressed. Maybe they asked, "Are you sure?" Or, "That sounds too good to be true." Or, "I hope you're not getting your hopes up." And they can magnify that frequency until it becomes intrusive thoughts, until it becomes anxiety, until it becomes the feeling that maybe you were delusional, maybe you misread the signs, maybe you should pull back and protect yourself from disappointment. The portal requires silence, not for humility, not because there's some spiritual virtue in being secretive, but for signal integrity. Pure signal, uncontaminated by the frequencies of others, is what maintains the bridge. And the mistake most chosen ones make is thinking they can trust people with this information just because those people love them or have known them for years. But love doesn't equal clearance. History doesn't equal compatibility. And speaking your activation into ears that are not cleared to receive it is the fastest way to collapse a portal that was supposed to change everything. The Lunar Oversight Council is watching response time. There is a council, chosen one, and it operates beyond human governance, beyond earthly authority. This council oversees wealth timeline activations, monitoring not just who receives clearance, but how they respond once the portal goes live. And what they're measuring is not your excitement, not your gratitude, not your emotional reaction to finally receiving access. What they're measuring is your response time and the quality of your engagement. The portal opens briefly, not for weeks, not for months, but for a window of time that is determined by your specific activation parameters. And during that window, the Council is watching to see if you respond with precision or with emotional scrambling. Hesitation fueled by fear is recorded differently than hesitation caused by strategic analysis. The Council can distinguish between someone who freezes because they're afraid of making the wrong move and someone who pauses because they're calculating the best move. Fear-based hesitation sends a signal that you're still operating from trauma, from scarcity consciousness, from the belief that this opportunity could be a trap or could be taken away. And that signal triggers contingency protocols. The Council begins to question whether you're actually ready for the wealth timeline or whether you need more preparation time. And if they determine you're not ready, they don't extend the window. They simply let it close and move on to evaluate the next candidate. But analytical hesitation, the kind where you're pausing to assess the situation with clarity rather than reacting from panic, that sends a completely different signal. It tells the Council that you understand what's happening, that you're not being swept away by excitement or by desperation, that you're approaching the activation with the level of strategic awareness required to operate on a wealth timeline. Wealth timelines are not handed to people who will squander them through reactive decision-making. They're granted to people who can hold power without power corrupting their judgment, who can receive resources without resources overwhelming their capacity for strategic thinking. The enemy understands this measurement system, and they attempt to induce panic specifically so you self-disqualify. They'll create sudden crises, manufacture emergencies, deploy distractions that feel urgent and overwhelming, all designed to trigger emotional scrambling. Because if they can get you to react from panic, if they can get you to make fear-based decisions during the window when the council is watching, they can get you to disqualify yourself without ever having to fight against the higher authority that authorized your activation. You'll shut down your own portal by demonstrating that you're not yet capable of the calm, controlled engagement that wealth timelines require. Calm is not virtue here. It's not about being a good person or being spiritually evolved. Calm is a verification code. It's a signal that gets transmitted to the council telling them, this candidate understands what's happening and is not controlled by their emotional responses. When you maintain calm during the activation window, even when circumstances are chaotic, even when everything in your environment is pushing you toward panic, you're sending a signal that you passed the test, that you're ready, that you can be trusted with access to a timeline where resources flow differently, where opportunities arrive through channels that would overwhelm someone who operates from fear. The council is watching right now. Your portal is open, and they're measuring how you engage with the first signs of the activation. Are you scrambling? Are you panicking? Are you letting fear drive your decisions? Or are you maintaining the calm, strategic clarity that confirms you're ready for what's about to be transferred? Because the window won't stay open indefinitely, chosen one. And emotional scrambling will close it faster than any external attack ever could. Mistake 2. Reverting to survival identity. The second critical mistake that shuts down wealth timelines is reverting to survival identity once the portal opens. You've operated in survival mode for years, maybe your entire life. You've developed behaviors, reflexes, decision-making patterns that were absolutely necessary when you were under containment, when resources were scarce, when every choice had to be calculated based on immediate survival rather than long-term strategy. But those behaviors, those reflexes, they're coded to a version of you that no longer exists in the system registry. The wealth timeline is not opening for the person who had to survive. It's opening for the person who completed survival training and graduated to operational status. When you revert to old survival behaviors after the portal activates, the timeline assumes misidentification. It thinks it made an error, that it opened for the wrong person, that the signal it received indicating you were ready was somehow corrupted or falsified. Old behaviors trigger legacy systems that no longer apply to you. Every time you make a decision from lack consciousness, every time you hoard resources out of fear they won't come again, every time you operate from the assumption that you need to grab everything you can right now because this might be your only chance, you're activating old identity codes that tell the wealth timeline you're not who you claim to be. Survival patterns were necessary once. They kept you alive. They helped you navigate years of manufactured scarcity without completely breaking down. But now, they register as fraudulent credentials. It's like showing up to a high-security clearance facility with an expired ID badge. The badge worked at one time, served its purpose, got you through the doors you needed to get through back then. But security systems at this new level don't recognize expired credentials. They see the old badge, and they register it as an authentication failure, as someone trying to access a system they're not cleared for. The enemy reinforces scarcity reflexes because they collapse the timeline instantly. Hostile forces know they can't shut down your portal through direct assault, but they can trigger your old survival programming and let that programming shut it down from the inside. They'll create situations that feel like the scarcity you just escaped, a sudden expense, an unexpected loss. a moment where it seems like everything's falling apart again, and they're watching to see if you react from the new identity or if you snap back to survival mode. Because if you snap back, if you start making decisions from fear of loss rather than from strategic clarity, the timeline interprets that as disqualification. The wealth gate only responds to those who no longer beg it to open. This is the key distinction between survival identity and operational identity. Survival identity is always in negotiation with reality, always trying to convince the universe to give it what it needs, always operating from a position of lack, trying to argue its way into abundance. But operational identity doesn't beg. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't try to convince anyone of anything. It simply receives what it's cleared for and directs those resources toward mission objectives. The wealth timeline is calibrated to recognize operational identity, and when it detects survival programming running instead, it assumes the clearance was issued in error. You cannot access a wealth timeline while operating from the belief that resources are scarce and unpredictable. You cannot maintain portal alignment while hoarding, while making fear-based decisions, while treating every opportunity like it might be your last. Those behaviors made sense in the old system, but you're not in the old system anymore. The portal opened specifically because you completed the training that was supposed to break you out of survival consciousness permanently. And if you revert, if you go back to those patterns even for a moment, you're telling the timeline that the training didn't take, that you're not actually ready, that the clearance should be revoked until you complete another round of preparation. Ancient financial guardians require clean hands. The wealth timeline you just gained access to is not governed by modern financial systems or by human economic structures. It's overseen by forces that are older than markets, older than currency, older than any recorded civilization. These ancient financial guardians operate according to laws of exchange that predate human understanding of commerce, laws that are absolute and unforgiving and completely unconcerned with mercy or second chances. And they require one thing above all else before they allow sustained access to the wealth track: clean hands. Not perfect hands, not sinless hands, but clean hands, meaning hands that hold no unresolved obligations, no active deceptions, no hidden extractions that remain unacknowledged. The mistake most chosen ones make is believing that imperfection disqualifies them, that they need to be morally flawless before they can access wealth timelines. But that's not what the Guardians are measuring. They're not looking for perfection. They're looking for balance, for closure, for accounts that have been settled, even if those accounts involved mistakes or failures or moments of compromise. What collapses access is not past imperfection. It's unacknowledged imbalance. It's debts you know you owe, but haven't addressed. It's deceptions you're still maintaining because they seem necessary for survival. It's extractions you benefited from that you've never reconciled or made right. The Guardians don't punish. They don't judge in the way humans judge. They simply redirect flow away from instability. If your hands are holding unresolved obligations, if there are energetic debts attached to your signal that you're pretending don't exist, those create instability in your field. And instability means you cannot hold the resources the wealth timeline is trying to deliver. It would be like trying to pour water into a cracked vessel. The resources would flow toward you and immediately leak out through the unresolved obligations, through the energetic debts, through the imbalances you've been carrying without addressing them. Any unresolved obligation, deception, or hidden extraction weakens your access. Maybe there's someone you borrowed from and never paid back. Maybe there's a lie you told to protect yourself that you're still maintaining. Maybe there's a situation where you benefited from someone else's loss and you've never acknowledged it, never tried to make it right. These things create interference in your signal. The Guardians can see them instantly because they operate at a level of perception that can't be fooled by human rationalization or justification. And when they detect instability, they don't lecture you or send you warnings. They simply route the resources to someone else whose hands are clean enough to hold what's being transferred. Restitution closes old loops the enemy hoped would remain open. Hostile forces benefit when you carry unresolved obligations because those obligations act as energetic anchors, keeping you attached to timelines of lack and limitation. They want you to avoid restitution, to rationalize why you don't need to address those old debts, to convince yourself that it's too late or too complicated, or that you were justified in your actions, so there's nothing to reconcile. Because as long as those loops remain open, as long as those imbalances exist in your field, you cannot maintain stable access to wealth timelines. The resources might arrive temporarily, but they won't stay. They'll leak out through the unresolved channels, or they'll get redirected to settling old debts in ways you didn't plan for. The Guardians are not interested in your excuses or your explanations. They're only interested in whether your energetic signature shows balance or shows open loops that create instability. And if you want sustained access to the wealth timeline that just activated, you need to close those loops now. Not perfectly, not by becoming a saint, but by acknowledging what needs to be acknowledged, by addressing what needs to be addressed, by making whatever restitution is within your power to make. Because clean hands aren't about moral superiority, they're about energetic stability, and only stable vessels can hold what the ancient Guardians are trying to deliver. Mistake 3. Misreading the gift's disguise. The third mistake that collapses wealth timelines is one of perception, and it's particularly insidious because it causes chosen ones to walk past their activation without even recognizing what just happened. Wealth in this timeline does not arrive labeled or ceremonial. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets or with obvious signs that say, "This is your portal opening, pay attention." It arrives disguised, often in forms that look mundane, irrelevant, or even disappointing to someone who's expecting something grand. And many chosen ones lose access permanently by dismissing the first offering as too small, too ordinary, too disconnected from what they thought wealth activation would look like. The portal tests recognition before expansion. This is a critical principle that most people never understand. The wealth timeline doesn't open fully until you demonstrate that you can recognize wealth when it appears in unexpected forms, when it arrives through channels you weren't monitoring, when it shows up as something that doesn't match your preconceived notions of what abundance should look like. The first offering is almost always disguised specifically to test whether you're paying attention with clarity or whether you're only looking for opportunities that match your expectations. What looks mundane may be the keystone transaction, the critical exchange that unlocks everything else. It might be a small opportunity that seems beneath your skill level. It might be a connection with someone who doesn't appear powerful or influential. It might be a random piece of information that doesn't seem immediately useful. It might be an amount of money that feels insignificant compared to what you actually need. But if that offering is the first manifestation of your portal activation, dismissing it sends a signal to the wealth timeline that you failed the recognition test. And when you fail that test, the timeline doesn't send a bigger, more obvious offering. It closes. It moves on to find someone else who has the perceptual clarity to recognize wealth regardless of its disguise. The enemy encourages contempt specifically, so you step past the threshold unknowingly. Hostile forces know they can't prevent the portal from opening, but they can manipulate your perception so you don't see it when it does. They plant expectations in your mind about what wealth activation should look like. Sudden windfalls, dramatic opportunities, obvious breakthroughs, and then when the actual activation arrives in a form that doesn't match those expectations, they whisper that it's not enough, that it's not what you were promised, that you should wait for something better. And if you listen to that whisper, if you allow contempt for the disguised offering to make you dismiss it, you literally step past the threshold without crossing it. The door was open, the portal was active, but you walked right by it because it didn't look the way you thought it should. This is why humility in recognition is so critical during activation periods. Not humility in the sense of thinking you don't deserve grand things, but humility in the sense of being willing to engage with whatever appears without prejudging its significance based on surface appearance. The wealth timeline is testing whether you can see past disguise, whether you have the spiritual perception to recognize opportunity regardless of packaging. Because once you are operating on a wealth track, resources will often arrive through unexpected channels, through people and situations that don't advertise their significance, through moments that could easily be dismissed as coincidence or irrelevance if you're not paying attention with clarity. Many chosen ones spend years waiting for their portal to open, never realizing it already opened and closed multiple times while they were looking the other way, while they were dismissing offerings that didn't match their expectations, while they were stepping past thresholds because the doorway didn't look impressive enough. Don't be one of them, chosen one. When something unexpected arrives in the days and weeks following this new moon activation, engage with it. Don't dismiss it because it seems small. Don't ignore it because it doesn't match your vision of what wealth should look like. Because the disguised offering might be the keystone, and walking past it might be the mistake that collapses your entire timeline before you ever realized you had access. Time engineers have shortened your window. The activation you just received operates on compressed time, and you need to understand what that means for how you engage with this portal. Time engineers, forces that operate at levels where temporal manipulation is possible, have shortened your window specifically because your timing history showed dangerous accuracy. You've been too precise in the past, too strategic in your waiting, too calculated in your patience. And while those qualities served you during the containment period, they're now working against you because the wealth timeline doesn't need more patience from you. It needs immediate, decisive engagement. This activation overrides years of delay, compressing opportunity into days or hours. The time that was stolen from you, the years you spent waiting while others advanced, the countless delays that kept you locked in limitation, all of that temporal debt is being paid back, not gradually, but all at once. The opportunities that should have unfolded over years are being compressed into a narrow window of time, arriving simultaneously or in rapid succession. This is not normal timeline flow. This is accelerated compensation, temporal compression designed to deliver in days what should have taken years. And if you approach this compressed window with the same patience and careful analysis you used during the delay period, you will miss it entirely. Overthinking is not caution here. It is temporal sabotage. During the containment period, overthinking protected you. It kept you from making desperate decisions, from compromising your integrity for quick relief, from falling into traps disguised as opportunities. But now, in the activation period, overthinking is the enemy's primary weapon against you. They know they can't stop the opportunities from arriving, but they can get you to hesitate, to analyze endlessly, to wait for more information, to seek more confirmation. And while you're hesitating, while you're overthinking, the compressed window is advancing without you. Opportunities are appearing and disappearing in hours instead of days. Doors are opening and closing while you're still trying to decide if you should walk through them. The wealth timeline advances regardless of readiness. This is perhaps the hardest truth for chosen ones to accept, because you've been conditioned to believe that you should wait until you're fully prepared, until you have all the information, until you feel confident and certain. But compressed timelines don't operate that way. They don't pause while you get ready. They don't slow down to accommodate your need for certainty. They move at their own pace, delivering opportunities according to their own schedule. And if you're not ready to engage immediately, those opportunities get redirected to someone else who is. Missed entry points are not reopened. In normal timeline flow, if you miss an opportunity, another similar opportunity might appear later. But in compressed timelines, each entry point is unique and time-sensitive. If you miss it, because you were overthinking, because you were waiting for more clarity, because you were trying to feel more prepared, that specific entry point closes permanently. Another opportunity might appear, but it won't be the same opportunity. It will be operating under different parameters, requiring different responses, potentially offering different outcomes. And each missed entry point narrows the overall window, brings you closer to the moment when the compression ends and normal time resumes, leaving you back in the slow, gradual timeline you were trying to escape. The warning exists because your timing history showed dangerous accuracy. The forces monitoring your activation know that you're exceptionally skilled at timing, at knowing when to move and when to wait. That skill kept you alive during containment, kept you from making fatal mistakes when hostile forces were trying to trigger your collapse. But now, that same skill is dangerous because it makes you prone to waiting when you should be moving, to analyzing when you should be acting, to seeking perfect timing when the compressed window requires immediate engagement. They shortened your window specifically to counteract your tendency toward precise timing, to force you into a mode of operation where speed and decisiveness matter more than perfect calculation. And if you don't adapt to this new temporal reality, if you keep operating with the timing strategies that worked during delay, you'll watch the entire compressed window pass by while you're still trying to determine the perfect moment to engage. Mistake 4. Letting guilt govern acquisition. The fourth critical mistake that shuts down wealth timelines is allowing guilt to govern your acquisition of resources. You were conditioned, chosen one, to associate personal gain with harm to others. This conditioning runs deep, was installed early, and operates largely below conscious awareness. Every time you considered having more, a voice whispered that your abundance would somehow cause someone else's lack. Every time you reached for resources, a feeling emerged that you were being selfish, greedy, taking more than your share. And over years, this conditioning created an internal kill switch that activates automatically whenever wealth tries to flow toward you. That belief that your gain equals someone else's loss acts as an internal sabotage mechanism. The wealth timeline doesn't interpret your guilt as virtue or as compassion for others. It interprets guilt as refusal of responsibility. When resources try to flow to you and you block them with guilt, with the belief that you don't really deserve this, or that accepting it somehow makes you complicit in others' suffering, the timeline reads that as a signal that you're refusing the transfer. And refused transfers get redirected. The resources don't just disappear. They get routed to someone else who can accept them without the internal conflict that would cause immediate leakage and instability. The portal interprets guilt as refusal of responsibility because guilt prevents you from fully claiming what's being offered and directing it toward the purposes it was meant to serve. Wealth on this timeline is not random abundance distributed for your personal comfort. It's strategic resource allocation, tools being delivered to operatives who are cleared to use them for missions that serve something larger than individual gratification. When you block the transfer with guilt, when you hesitate to accept because accepting feels morally complicated, you're telling the timeline that you don't understand what this wealth is for, that you think it's about you getting rich, rather than about you being equipped for operation. Wealth withheld from you does not become virtuous. It becomes weaponized elsewhere. This is the truth that guilt prevents you from seeing clearly. When you refuse resources out of some misguided belief that your poverty somehow serves others, those resources don't just evaporate into the ethers blessing everyone equally. They get redirected to people and systems that will absolutely use them, often in ways that perpetuate the very harm and inequality you were concerned about. The money you refused out of guilt doesn't feed the hungry. It goes to someone who has no hesitation about using it to accumulate more power, more control, more leverage over people like you who were taught that wanting resources makes you morally suspect. The enemy feeds on your hesitation to accept rightful transfer. Hostile forces installed the guilt programming specifically because it's so effective at making you sabotage yourself. They don't have to fight against the wealth trying to reach you. They just have to make you feel conflicted about receiving it, have to activate your conditioning about greed and selfishness and taking more than you need. And then you do their work for them, blocking your own access, refusing your own transfer, shutting down your own portal while they sit back and benefit from the resources that were meant to equip you for the very battles you're supposed to be fighting. You need to understand that accepting the wealth trying to reach you right now is not a moral compromise. It's a moral responsibility. The resources are not coming to you so you can live in luxury while others suffer. They're coming to you because you've been cleared to use them in ways that serve purposes the wealth timeline recognizes as aligned with higher orders. And every moment you spend in guilt, every hesitation about whether you really deserve this, every internal debate about whether accepting makes you complicit in systemic inequality, all of that is time you're not using the resources the way they're meant to be used. The guilt serves no one, protects no one, helps no one. It only ensures that the resources get redirected to people who have no such qualms, no such hesitation, no such moral complexity about acquisition. Bloodline accounts have been unsealed. The wealth timeline that just activated is not only about you as an individual, it carries inherited assets that have been accumulating through your lineage, waiting for someone in the bloodline who could finally access them without being destroyed by them. This is not money in bank accounts or physical inheritance. This is energetic entitlement to command resources, ancient agreements, and alignments that your ancestors established but could never fully activate because they were operating under different restrictions, under different levels of oppression, under circumstances that made full access impossible. They endured, they survived, they made choices that preserved the lineage so that someday someone down the line would be positioned to receive what they could only prepare. You are that someone, chosen one. The bloodline accounts have been unsealed specifically because your clearance level verified that you could handle what's been accumulating for generations. But here's the mistake that collapses access for many who reach this point: rejecting the inheritance out of loyalty to suffering ancestors. You look at what your grandparents endured, what your parents survived, the poverty and struggle and limitation that defined their lives, and something in you feels that accepting wealth, accessing resources they never had, somehow betrays their memory, as if their suffering was meaningful because it was suffering, and your abundance would diminish the significance of what they went through. This belief breaks continuity, severs the very connection that made the unsealing possible. Your ancestors didn't endure so you could apologize. They didn't survive systematic oppression, didn't sacrifice their own comfort and security, didn't make the hard choices that preserved the bloodline just so you could feel guilty about finally accessing what they prepared. They endured so you could execute. They suffered so you wouldn't have to. They made it possible for someone in the lineage to finally break through the limitations that trapped them, and that someone is you. And when you reject the wealth, trying to reach you out of some misplaced loyalty to their struggle, you're not honoring them. You're erasing their investment. The mistake is, believing acceptance betrays them. But in truth, refusal erases their investment. Every sacrifice they made, every opportunity they gave up so their children could have slightly more than they did, every moment they held on when giving up would have been easier, all of it was investment in a future they knew they'd never see. They were planting seeds for a harvest they'd never reap, building foundations for structures they'd never live in. And the harvest is ready now. The structure is complete. The bloodline accounts are unsealed and waiting for you to access them. And if you refuse out of guilt, out of the belief that you don't deserve what they never had, you're taking everything they invested and throwing it away, telling them their sacrifices meant nothing, that the lineage they preserved was not worth preserving. This wealth timeline carries your ancestors' hopes, their dreams, their vision of what could be possible if someone in the bloodline finally broke through. They're not watching from some distant realm, feeling resentful that you're receiving what they couldn't have. They're celebrating, they're supporting, they're pushing resources toward you because your success is their vindication, proof that their suffering wasn't meaningless, that their endurance achieved its purpose. You accessing these bloodline accounts doesn't betray them. It completes them. It brings their story to the fulfillment they always knew was possible but couldn't reach themselves. So when the wealth arrives, when the resources start flowing, when opportunities appear that would have been impossible for your ancestors to access, don't block them with guilt about receiving what they never had. Receive them as the inheritance you were always meant to claim, as the culmination of generations of preparation, as the fulfillment of every prayer they prayed and every sacrifice they made, hoping that someday someone would break through. The bloodline accounts are yours, chosen one. Accept them. Use them. Honor your ancestors by executing what they made possible, not by refusing the very breakthrough they spent their lives preparing. Mistake 5. Attempting to control the delivery method. The fifth mistake that collapses wealth timelines is trying to control how the resources arrive. The portal has its own intelligence, its own navigation system, and it selects delivery channels based on factors you cannot see and variables you don't have access to. It might choose a specific person to be the conduit. It might route resources through a particular system or institution. It might orchestrate what appears to be an error or accident. It might deliver through a reversal of something that seemed lost. And the critical mistake chosen ones make is attempting to force the delivery to happen through the channels they expect, through the methods they're comfortable with, through the pathways that make logical sense to their human understanding. Forcing expectation collapses probability fields. This is quantum mechanics applied to wealth manifestation, and most people don't understand how it works. When the portal opens, multiple probability pathways exist simultaneously. Different ways the resources could arrive, different channels through which the wealth could flow, different people or circumstances that could serve as delivery mechanisms. But these pathways exist in superposition, meaning they're all potential until observation and expectation collapse them into one specific outcome. And when you force a rigid expectation about how the delivery must happen, when you decide it has to come through your job, or through a specific opportunity, or through a particular person, you collapse all the other pathways. You reduce infinite possibility to one narrow channel. And if that channel encounters any blockage or interference, the entire delivery fails. Control signals mistrust, and mistrust reroutes supply. The wealth timeline interprets your need to control the delivery method as evidence that you don't actually trust the process, that you don't believe the resources will arrive unless you manage every aspect of how they come. And that lack of trust is a massive red flag to the systems governing these timelines. Because if you can't trust the delivery when you have no control over it, how can you be trusted with the resources once they arrive? If you need to micromanage how wealth reaches you, you'll definitely try to micromanage what you do with it, which means you'll operate from fear and control rather than from strategic flexibility. And wealth timelines don't grant sustained access to people who operate from fear and control. The enemy encourages rigid planning specifically to cause frustration and exit. Hostile forces know that if they can get you fixated on one specific pathway for how the resources should arrive, they can block that pathway and watch you conclude that the portal failed, that the activation wasn't real, that you were delusional to believe anything was changing. They can't stop the portal from sending resources, but they can manipulate your expectations so that when resources arrive through unexpected channels, you don't recognize them or you reject them because they didn't match your rigid plan. And then you exit the activation period early, frustrated and disappointed, never realizing that the resources were arriving the whole time through pathways you weren't monitoring because you were too focused on the one pathway you decided was the only valid option. Wealth here arrives sideways. Only flexibility keeps it intact. This is perhaps the most important principle for navigating compressed timelines. The resources are coming, the delivery is in motion, but the path they're taking is lateral, unexpected, non-linear. They're not coming through the front door where you've been waiting and watching. They're coming through the side door you didn't even know existed, through channels you weren't monitoring, through people and circumstances that seem unrelated to wealth or opportunity. And if you're rigid in your expectations, if you're only watching the pathways that make logical sense, you'll miss the actual delivery entirely. You'll be staring at the front door, wondering why nothing's arriving, while the resources are being deposited through the side entrance you weren't paying attention to. Flexibility is not passive waiting. It's active awareness with open parameters. It means you're paying attention to everything, not filtering your perception through preconceived notions about how abundance should manifest. It means you're willing to engage with opportunities that don't fit your plan, with people who don't match your expectations, with circumstances that seem random or irrelevant at first glance, because the portal is testing your flexibility specifically, testing whether you can receive from unexpected sources, whether you can recognize wealth when it arrives disguised, or through channels you would have dismissed if you were operating from rigid control patterns. The delivery is already in motion, chosen one. The resources are navigating toward you right now. But if you're sitting there with a rigid plan about exactly how they must arrive, exactly which person must deliver them, exactly what form they must take, you're creating barriers the portal has to work around. And every barrier you create through forced expectation is another opportunity for interference, another point where hostile forces can introduce delays or diversions. Let go of control over the method. Focus instead on maintaining your signal clarity, on staying aligned with the frequency that attracted the activation in the first place, on being flexible enough to recognize and receive wealth regardless of which door it walks through. Because it's walking through one door or another right now, and your job is not to control which door it is. Your job is to be ready when it arrives. Hostile forces cannot steal, only distract. Here's what you need to understand about the nature of the opposition you're facing. Hostile forces cannot steal your wealth timeline activation. They don't have the authority to shut down your portal directly. They can't intercept the resources that have been cleared for transfer to you. They can't override the authorization that was issued from levels of power they have no access to. The clearance came from too high. The activation was approved by councils that operate beyond their jurisdiction. And so they're left with only one strategy, one weapon they can deploy against you: distraction. They flood your environment with irrelevant urgency, create crises that demand your immediate attention, manufacture emergencies that pull your focus away from the subtle openings where your wealth timeline is actually manifesting. Emotional fires are lit specifically to pull attention away from subtle openings. These aren't random problems that just happen to appear during your activation period. They're strategically deployed distractions designed to consume your mental bandwidth, to keep you so focused on putting out fires that you don't notice the doors opening, the opportunities arriving, the resources positioning themselves for transfer. The hostile forces study your psychology, identify what triggers your strongest emotional reactions, and then they activate those triggers repeatedly during the critical window when your portal is open. They know they can't stop the wealth from arriving, but they can keep you so distracted that you miss it when it does, that you're too overwhelmed to recognize the openings, that you're too consumed with managing crises to engage with the actual activation. The mistake here is fighting every battle presented, because if you do, if you allow yourself to be pulled into every conflict, every drama, every urgent situation that appears during this activation window, you'll spend the entire compressed timeline managing emergencies while your wealth track advances without you. Not every fire is yours to put out. Not every crisis is yours to solve. Not every urgent situation actually requires your immediate attention. Many of them are specifically designed to look and feel urgent, to trigger your sense of responsibility or your fear of consequences, to pull you into engagement that drains your energy and fragments your focus. And every moment you spend fighting battles that aren't yours, you're missing the quiet signals that indicate where your real opportunities are appearing. Portals close when focus fractures. The wealth timeline requires sustained attention, not scattered awareness that's constantly being pulled in different directions by manufactured crises. When your focus fractures, when your attention gets divided among multiple urgent situations that all seem to demand immediate response, your signal loses coherence. The portal interprets this as inability to maintain the concentration required for wealth timeline operation. Because operating on a wealth track isn't passive, It requires you to hold focus on the mission, to maintain awareness of the subtle signals indicating where resources are moving, to stay present to opportunities that might appear for only moments before moving on to someone else who's paying attention. Precision attention is your primary defense against distraction warfare. Not willpower, not discipline in the traditional sense, but the capacity to discern which situations actually require your engagement and which are distractions designed to fragment your focus. This requires you to ruthlessly prioritize during the activation window, to let certain things fall apart if they need to fall apart, to ignore certain urgencies, even when ignoring them feels irresponsible or dangerous. Because the real danger is not in letting distractions burn themselves out while you maintain focus on the portal. The real danger is in getting so consumed with managing irrelevant urgencies that you miss the wealth timeline entirely, that you wake up after the compressed window closes and realize you spent the entire activation period fighting battles that didn't matter while the opportunities that did matter passed by unnoticed. The hostile forces are counting on your sense of responsibility, your desire to handle everything properly, your fear of consequences if you ignore things that seem urgent. They're deploying psychological warfare designed to make you believe that if you don't respond to every crisis, everything will fall apart. But everything will not fall apart. Most of what appears urgent during this window is illusory urgency, manufactured crisis designed specifically to test whether you can maintain focus under conditions of environmental chaos. The portal is watching to see if you can distinguish between real priorities and strategic distractions, and your wealth timeline remains open only as long as you can hold precision attention on what actually matters, letting the rest burn if it needs to burn, trusting that what's truly important will still be there after you've secured your activation. Mistakes. 6 and 7. Abandoning stillness, rushing announcement. The final two mistakes that collapse wealth timelines are opposite expressions of the same fundamental error: inability to hold the tension between activation and manifestation. Mistake 6 is abandoning stillness too early, breaking the meditative state that allows the portal to complete its transfer. Mistake 7 is rushing to announcement, broadcasting the activation before the resources are anchored in your physical reality. And these two errors account for more failed activations than all the other mistakes combined, because they represent the moment when chosen ones lose their nerve, when the waiting becomes unbearable, when the need to do something, to prove something, to tell someone becomes overwhelming and causes them to act prematurely in ways that destabilize the entire timeline. Stillness calibrates. This is the principle most people don't understand. When the portal opens, when the wealth timeline activates, your system needs time to calibrate to the new frequency, to adjust to operating at a level where resources flow differently than they did in your old reality. Stillness is not inaction. It's active calibration, a state where you're allowing your nervous system, your energy field, your decision-making processes to reconfigure themselves to match the wealth timeline's operating parameters. And if you abandon stillness too early, if you break into frantic activity because staying still feels like wasting the opportunity, you interrupt the calibration process. Your system never fully adjusts to the new frequency, which means you'll continue operating from old patterns even as new resources try to arrive, and that mismatch causes system instability that collapses the portal. Haste exposes. When you move too quickly during the activation window, when you rush from excitement or from fear that the opportunity will disappear if you don't grab it immediately, You expose yourself to interference you could have avoided. Rushed decisions are usually poor decisions, made without full information, without strategic consideration of consequences, without awareness of how your choices are being observed by both allied and hostile forces. And in the heightened environment of an active portal, where multiple systems are watching to see how you handle the activation, haste signals that you're not in control, that you're being driven by emotion rather than by strategic clarity. And that signal attracts interference, invites hostile forces to deploy additional pressure tactics because they can see you're already destabilized, and one more push might cause complete collapse. Leaving silence too early destabilizes the timeline. The silence period after activation is critical. It's when the resources are moving through invisible channels, when connections are being made behind the scenes, when systems are processing your clearance and authorizing transfers. If you break silence during this period, if you start telling people about what's happening before the transfers are complete, you introduce interference into processes that require clean signal to execute properly. People's reactions, their doubt, their questions, their energy, all of it becomes static that disrupts the delicate coordination required for timeline manifestation. The resources are en route, but they're navigating through complex systems, and premature disclosure creates turbulence that can delay or even derail the delivery. Announcing before anchoring invites contestation. This is the mechanism behind Mistake 7, and it's devastatingly effective at collapsing activations that would have otherwise succeeded. When you announce your wealth timeline activation before the resources are fully anchored in your physical reality, before the transfers are complete and confirmed, you create an opening for hostile forces to contest the activation. You're essentially broadcasting, "I just received clearance," before you've actually received the resources, and that broadcast allows enemies to file challenges, to claim the resources were misallocated, to introduce bureaucratic delays in systems you don't even know exist. And while the challenges are being processed, while the contests are being reviewed, your portal window is advancing, time is passing, and by the time the contestation is resolved, the compressed timeline has moved on. These final two errors account for most failed activations because they occur at the most vulnerable moment, right at the threshold between activation and manifestation, when the chosen one can feel that something is happening but can't yet see the physical evidence, when faith is required but faith feels dangerous because you've been disappointed so many times before. The enemy knows this is when you're most likely to break, to abandon stillness out of fear that nothing's actually happening, to rush announcement out of need for validation that you're not delusional. And they deploy maximum pressure at exactly this moment, creating urgencies that make stillness feel irresponsible, creating isolation that makes silence feel unbearable. The wealth portal does not need witnesses. It needs completion. This is the truth that counters both mistakes. You don't need to tell anyone about your activation for it to be real. You don't need external validation to confirm that the portal opened. You don't need to prove to yourself or others that something is happening by breaking into frantic activity or by broadcasting to everyone who will listen. What you need is to hold the stillness, maintain the silence, and allow the completion sequence to run without interference. The resources are coming. The transfers are processing. The timeline is manifesting. And your job is simply to hold steady, to not break too early out of fear or excitement or need for validation, to trust that what's invisible right now will become visible in perfect timing as long as you don't destabilize the process by abandoning stillness or rushing announcement. Conclusion. The portal is active right now, The wealth timeline is moving, and you've just been briefed on the 7 critical mistakes that have collapsed activations for countless chosen ones throughout history. But knowing about these mistakes is not enough. Chosen one. Knowledge without application is just information, and information doesn't keep portals open. What keeps your portal open is moment-by-moment awareness of which mistake you're being tempted toward right now, which old pattern is trying to reassert itself, which enemy strategy is currently being deployed to trigger your self-disqualification. They cannot close your portal directly. The authorization came from too high. The clearance was issued by councils they have no power over, but they can manipulate you into shutting it down yourself through user-based errors, speaking to the wrong people, reverting to survival identity, letting guilt block acquisition, attempting to control delivery methods, getting distracted by manufactured crises, abandoning stillness too early, rushing to announcement before anchoring is complete. 7 mistakes, 7 ways to collapse a timeline that was supposed to change everything. And every single one of them is operating through psychological warfare right now, through environmental pressure, through the whispers in your mind that say you should do something, say something, prove something, control something. Your errors are the only remaining variable. The portal is open. The timeline is active. The resources are in motion. Everything on the higher authority side has been executed perfectly. The activation was authorized, the clearance was granted, the wealth track is live and waiting for you to maintain signal integrity long enough for the transfers to complete. But the enemy is working the only angle they have left: you, your psychology, your patterns, your fears, your needs, your conditioning. They're studying you right now, identifying which mistake you're most vulnerable to, preparing to trigger that vulnerability at exactly the moment when it will cause maximum damage to your timeline. The next hours, days, or weeks will determine whether this activation becomes manifestation or becomes another story about a portal that opened and closed before you ever walked through it. Stay silent, stay still, stay flexible, stay clean, stay focused. And when the wealth arrives, and it will arrive if you avoid the mistakes, receive it with the calm certainty of someone who always knew this moment was coming, who maintained alignment through years of containment specifically to be ready for this exact threshold. The portal is yours, chosen one. Don't shut it down before the transfer completes. The warning has been delivered. What you do with it determines everything.